In this movie, we'll turn our black and white horse into a near silhouette using another adjustment layer known simply as brightness contrast. And to make that happen, go up to the layer menu, choose new adjustment layer, and choose brightness/contrast from the top of the list. And that will once again bring up the new layer dialog box. I'm going to call this guy dark contrast because we need to darken the horse as well as increase its contrast. And then I'll click OK. And now I'll go ahead and reduce the brightness value to its absolute minimum of -150, and I'll crank the contrast value up to its maximum of 100. But notice that doesn't quite do the trick. I'll go ahead and move the horse over here, and you can see that we have these areas. If you look very closely, we have these areas of dark gray that we're going to have to contend with. And I'm also making the mane really bushy as well as the tail. And I don't want that at all, which is why I'm going to do something I very rarely do. I'm going to turn on the Use Legacy checkbox, which is going to restore brightness contrast to the way it used to work in the old days, which generally speaking is bad. However, in our case, it's going to work out nicely because it allows us to get the horse that much darker. And so the first thing I'm going to do is reduce the brightness value, let's say all the way to its minimum. And that not only makes the horse black, as you can see here, with a few exceptions down here in the hooves, for example, but it also darkens the white background, which is not something we want. I can regain that white background by cranking the contrast value all the way up to +100. But here's the problem. If I go ahead and zoom in on the mane, for example, you can see that we have these horribly jagged transitions, which is in no way what I want. So I'm going to take that brightness value to half of its minimum, which is -50, and I'll match the contrast value by changing it to +50, so just 50, if you will. And that goes ahead and gives us a dark horse, just like we had before, but it also gives us these soft transitions around the mane, the tail, and so forth. And then I'll just go ahead and hide the properties panel, and I'll press Control-0 or Command-0 on the Mac in order to center my zoom. Now notice in the layers panel, we have a total of 3 layers, horse followed by black and white, B&W right there, and then dark contrast. And that indicates the order in which the layers are applied. So the horse layer is at the bottom of the stack where it should be, and the other 2 are on top of it. But what that means is that contrast adjustment that we just applied is happening after we convert the image to black and white, which is not really what we want, because after all, I'm going to want the entire image to appear in black and white. Now, the great thing about adjustment layers is they affect all the layers below them. So if I move the B&W layer below the horse layer just by dragging it and dropping it into place right there, then I'll convert the image to black and white before there's any imagery. Then I'll put the horse layer on top of it, and then I'll assign the dark contrast layer to the horse so that we have a dark, colorful horse. Or I could go ahead and drag the B&W layer above dark contrast, and that way, if I go ahead and Alt-click or Option-click on the eye in front of the horse layer, you can see that we start with a horse, and then we darken it up and increase its contrast, and finally, we go ahead and convert it to black and white. And that way, we can keep the B&W layer on top of every other layer we add to this document, and that way, the entire image will remain black and white. And just to make sure that stays that way, I'll go ahead and click on the dark contrast layer, and that way, whatever layer I create next will appear on top of it instead of at the very top of the stack. And that's how you convert a black and white image to a near silhouette, because after all, the hooves are still pretty bright, using an old-style application of a brightness contrast adjustment layer here inside Photoshop.